Every ounce of silver you own carries two prices. One of them is in dollars, and it is the one you check. The other one is in gold, and it is the one that decides whether you are early or late. Most people never look at the second price. They watch the dollar number climb and feel good, watch it slide and feel sick, and never once ask the question underneath it. How much gold does my silver buy right now, compared to what it used to buy? That number has a name. It is the gold to silver ratio, and if you are holding silver inside a retirement account, or if you have been circling silver for a year and never quite pulled the trigger, that ratio is the thing your entire decision hangs on. So let me answer the question in the title straight, before I have earned anything. Is there a closing window for silver holders before this ratio moves again? Yes. There is always a window in this pair, and it is always closing, because this ratio does not ease shut politely. It sits nearly still for months, and then it travels a very long way in a very short stretch. Anyone who tells you it gives notice first has not watched it long enough. But the honest read is not the one the word fast usually implies, and I would rather lose you in the first minute than sell you a panic. The ratio is not stretched right now. It is backed well away from the compression it reached at the last record, and it has settled close to where it has spent most of the modern era. Silver is not screaming cheap against gold the way it was a while back. What is closing is not a bargain. What is closing is the condition where this decision is still calm, still cheap, and still reversible, and that condition is worth more than a bargain because almost nobody acts during one. Chew on this before I go a step further. The first coinage law this country ever passed fixed gold against silver at about 15-1. Congress picked that number because it was close to how the two metals actually came out of the ground, and close to what the world had paid for one against the other for centuries. In the modern era, that same relationship has run from the high teens all the way past 120. The men who wrote that law believed they were writing down a constant of nature. They were writing down a snapshot. I want to take you inside that law, because everything I am going to tell you about your own silver comes out of it. In 1792, the Congress sat down to invent American money from nothing. There was no dollar yet. There were Spanish pieces of 8 circulating. There were state paper notes that had already burned a generation of savers. And there was a Treasury Secretary named Alexander Hamilton who had studied what coins were trading for in the markets of Europe. The law they passed created the mint in Philadelphia, and it did something we would find strange now. It did not define the dollar as an idea. It defined the dollar as a weight. 371 1/4 grains of pure silver. That was the dollar, not backed by silver, made of it. And the gold eagle was defined by its own weight of pure gold, and when you set those two weights side by side, the arithmetic gave you a rate of about 15 ounces of silver to 1 ounce of gold. Understand why they chose 15? Hamilton did not pull it out of the air, and he did not pick it because it sounded tidy. He picked it because it was close to what the metals were actually fetching against each other in the trading centers of the world, and that market rate itself was not an accident either. Silver is roughly 15 to 20 times more common in the crust of the earth than gold. For thousands of years, from the mines of Spain to the mines of Mexico, that rough abundance kept the exchange between the two metals inside a band that a merchant in Rome and a merchant in London would both have recognized. So the founders wrote down a number that geology and several centuries of human trading had already agreed on. It was the most reasonable number anyone could have chosen. I know a man I will call Dale. He spent about 35 years selling cattle feed out of a yard east of Amarillo, ground Milo and cottonseed cake and mineral, moving it by the ton to feedlots across the panhandle. Dale never in his life quoted a customer a price without quoting a ratio in the same breath. How many bushels of corn it took to put on a pound of gain. How many pounds of feed against a pound of beef. He will tell you that no feeder ever went broke because the price of corn went up. They went broke because the relationship between two numbers moved, and they were still doing business off the old one. Dale owns silver now, some of it in an IRA, some of it in a safe. He is exactly the man this video is for, and he understood the point of the gold to silver ratio before he ever heard the phrase. Because here is what happened to that beautiful, reasonable, geologically sound number that the Congress of 1792 wrote into American law. It held for a while, and then the world refused to hold still, and the way it broke took metal straight out of American pockets. The break was arithmetic, and it was quiet, and almost nobody at the time understood it while it was happening. Over in Europe, the market rate between the two metals was not 15. It was closer to 15.5. That sounds like nothing. It is a rounding error to the modern ear. It was enough to empty a country. Follow it the way Dale would follow a feed spread. If the United States Mint says your ounce of gold is worth 15 ounces of silver, and a broker in Paris says your ounce of gold is worth 15.5, then the gold coin in your pocket is worth more abroad than it is at home. So you ship it. You take American gold eagles, you send them across the water, you bring back silver, and you have made a profit for doing nothing but noticing. And that is exactly what happened. Gold coin drained out of American circulation for decades. The country was legally on both metals and practically on one. The law had set a number, the world had set a different one, and the world won. By 1834, Congress had seen enough and moved the number, cutting the gold content of the coin and pushing the official rate to roughly 16-1. And now the error ran the other way. Now silver was the one being undervalued at the mint, and so silver walked out of American circulation the same way gold had walked out before it. Silver coins went to the melting pot and went overseas, and the shortage of small change got so bad that within 20 years, Congress had to cut the silver content of the dimes and quarters just to keep coins in the till at the general store. Read that sequence again, because it is the whole video. Twice, the most serious men in the country fixed the relationship between gold and silver by law. Twice, the pair repriced anyway. And both times, the person holding the undervalued metal at the moment of the reset got paid, and the person holding the overvalued one financed it without ever being told. Nobody rang a bell at either turn. The metal simply moved quietly into the hands of whoever was doing the arithmetic. That is not ancient history dressed up as a lesson. That is the mechanism your silver still lives inside. There is no fixed rate anymore, which means the repricing does not wait for an act of Congress. It happens continuously in the market, and the desks that trade this pair professionally are doing Dale's arithmetic every single day while the retail world watches the dollar price and feels things about it. Nobody on the financial channels is going to walk you through the second price, because the second price does not generate a headline and it does not generate a trade ticket. So, the ratio always moves. That part is settled by 2 centuries of American money. The real question is what this number is telling you at the level it is sitting now. And I will warn you in advance that the honest answer is less flattering to silver than you would expect from a video with the word fast in the title. Let me give you the range first, because you cannot judge a level without the range around it. At the blow-off top in 1980, when silver went vertical and coin shops had lines out the door, the ratio collapsed into the high teens. That is the tightest it has been in modern memory, and it lasted about 5 minutes in historical terms. In the panic of 2020, when the whole world wanted the deepest and most official asset it could find and wanted nothing to do with an industrial metal, the ratio blew out past 120. In the run of 2011, it came down to around 31, which is the level the loudest silver bulls still point at as their target. And across the whole modern floating era, the average has been somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 to 70. Now put the present against that. The ratio compressed hard into the last record, getting down to roughly 50 at the tightest, which was the most silver had been worth against gold in well over a decade. Then it re-expanded. It has spent this stretch drifting in the 60s without any conviction in either direction, which puts it near its own long-run average and nowhere near an extreme. And it is worth knowing exactly how it got back here, because the story is not the one you would guess. The ratio did not widen because gold went on some lonely tear while silver sat still. Both metals set records in the same stretch, and then both of them broke hard. Silver simply broke about twice as hard, roughly halving inside a matter of months, while gold gave back closer to a third of its record before it found a floor. That difference in the size of the fall is the entire re-expansion. Gold has since been rallying hard and is still sitting well below its own high water mark, and silver has clawed back a good portion of what it lost. 2 violent legs down, 2 different depths, and the ratio you're looking at now is the residue of that arithmetic, and nothing more mysterious than that. That is the part the urgency crowd skips. At this level, silver is not a gift. You are not being handed the once-in-a-decade discount that showed up when the ratio was north of 100 and everybody with a paycheck was terrified. You are being offered an ordinary relative price. And now the turn, because ordinary is not the same as unimportant. The ratio is not a valuation. It is a fear gauge. It widens when money wants the asset that central banks hold and settles international accounts with, and it narrows when money is willing to hold the volatile industrial one that gets used up in factories. So a ratio near its long-run average is telling you something specific and quite valuable. The market is neither panicked nor euphoric about this pair. Nobody is desperate. Nobody is celebrating. And that is precisely the condition in which a decision is cheap. Think about what it actually feels like at the extremes. When the ratio is stretched past 100, silver is on sale. And to buy it, you have to act with your stomach in a knot in the middle of a crisis, which is when almost no human being acts. When the ratio compresses toward 30, silver has already done the work. The phone is ringing, your brother-in-law has opinions, and there is no discount left to take. The middle is the only place where you can make this decision with a clear head. And the middle is exactly where nothing feels urgent, so the middle is where nothing gets done. That is the window. Not a date on a calendar. A condition, and conditions close without asking you first, which brings the whole thing down to something practical, because for most people watching, the real decision was never whether to own metal at all. It is which metal, in what proportion, inside the account they already have. And on that question, watch who has already decided. The central banks of the world have been buying gold at a record pace, 3 years running now, not trading it, buying it and putting it in their own vaults, where no other country's decision can switch it off. That is a relationship choice, the same kind Dale made every week of his working life, and you can make a version of it yourself. That is why our family put together the free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide. It walks through in plain language how American retirees diversify a portion of what they have built into physical gold and physical silver inside the 401k or the IRA they already own, without taxes and without penalties, and how the mix between the two metals is a choice you get to make rather than one that gets made for you by whichever one you happen to buy first. This is not something reserved for insiders or for people with a family office. If you have $100,000 or more in any retirement account, this is written for you. If you are watching this on your TV, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to shieldmysavings.com. It is free from our family to yours, no obligation and nothing to buy. Now come back with me because I said earlier there was a part worth waiting for. And it is this. The reason this ratio lurches instead of drifting has almost nothing to do with the gold half of the pair. It is all in the silver. Start with where silver comes from, because it is not what most people assume. Roughly 70 to 80% of all the silver mined on Earth does not come out of a silver mine. It comes out of a copper mine, a lead and zinc mine, a gold mine, as a byproduct that shows up in the ore alongside what the company was actually digging for. Lead and zinc operations alone account for something close to a third of world supply. Sit with what that means because it is the single most important structural fact about this metal. A copper company does not open a pit because silver got interesting. It opens a pit because copper got interesting. So when the price of silver doubles, the world does not respond by mining much more silver, because the people who produce most of the world's silver are not making their decisions based on silver at all. Supply barely answers the price. It is close to a vertical line in the short run, which means when demand shifts, price has to do all of the adjusting by itself. That is the mechanical reason this metal moves in a way that gold does not. Then layer the demand side on top. The Silver Institute, which is the industry's own body and has been counting this market for decades, has now recorded a 6th consecutive year in which the world used more silver than it produced. 6 straight years of shortfall. And here is the sentence I would not believe if a stranger said it to me across a kitchen table. That 6th deficit year is happening while total supply is running at its best level in about 10 years. Record supply into the market, and the market is still short. Do not take that from me. The Silver Institute publishes the World Silver Survey every year, and the summary is free to anybody with an internet connection. Go pull it up yourself, find the supply and demand balance, and read the line where total supply and total demand meet. That one page will tell you more about your silver than a year of financial television. The gap has to be filled from somewhere, and it is being filled out of above-ground inventories, the bars sitting in vaults from all the years the market was in surplus. Since the start of this decade, the drawdown out of those stocks adds up to the better part of a full year of global mine output consumed to cover deficits nobody outside the trade discussed. Now put the two prices back together, because this is where the disconnect lives. The price you see on the screen is the paper price, and it is set on futures desks by algorithms, by margin requirements, by positioning, and by traders who will never in their lives touch an ounce of metal. It moves fast, it overshoots in both directions, and enormous amounts of it can change hands without a single physical ounce moving anywhere. The physical price is what a fabricator or a coin buyer actually pays to take delivery of real metal. That one is stickier and much harder to shove around because behind it is a warehouse and a truck and somebody who needs the material. Most of the time, the two prices agree closely enough that nobody thinks about the difference. When they disagree, you see it in the premium over spot at the dealer, in lease rates spiking, in the futures curve inverting so that metal for immediate delivery costs more than metal 3 months out. Those are the symptoms of a real argument between the screen and the warehouse. And in that argument, the paper price is the one that eventually has to come back and reconcile, because the metal is the thing that actually exists. Tie the two halves together, and you have your answer about the window. Silver's tradable float is thin next to gold's. Its supply cannot respond to its own price, and its screen price is set in a paper market many times larger than the physical one. So when money decides to move between the two metals, silver gets shoved several times as far as gold does. That is why the ratio does not slide from 60 to 40 over a comfortable 18 months. It sits, and then it goes. 1980 and 2020 are the same phenomenon pointed in opposite directions, which means the question is no longer whether the ratio moves. It is what you specifically should do about it, and that depends entirely on which of three people you are. If you are holding silver at a profit, you bought lower, you watched a record print, and you have watched a good piece of that gain go back where it came from. I know exactly what that does to a person, because the gain stopped being a number the day you started mentally spending it. You have already decided what that money was for. The trap here is treating an unrealized gain as though it were already in your hand, because then every dip feels like a theft. Look at where your gain actually came from. If silver outran gold to give it to you, a piece of what you are holding is a ratio gain, and a ratio gain can be moved from one metal into the other without ever leaving the metals at all. You are allowed to take a win in the pair without taking a win in dollars. If you are underwater, you probably bought somewhere near the top of the last run, and you have watched this metal do the thing it has always done, which is lose about half of a record inside a matter of months. Your temptation is the oldest one in this business. End the discomfort by making the paper loss into a real one. Let me put the history of the pair to you plainly. Every single time this ratio reset, in 1792, in 1834, and in every modern cycle since, whoever was holding the undervalued metal at the moment of the reset got paid. You cannot get paid if you are not holding. The one thing selling here guarantees is that you keep the loss and the fear both. And if you have not bought yet, and you are afraid of catching a falling knife, understand what a ratio near its long-run average is actually saying to you. You are not being offered a gift, and you are not paying a crazy premium. You are being asked to pay an ordinary relative price for an asset with an extraordinary supply structure. That is a boring sentence, and boring is the correct texture for the decision. Nobody who bought metal in the calm part of the cycle has ever told me they regretted the calm. Dale was the second one, if you are wondering. He bought in a hurry once near a high, because the volume in his ear got loud. He has been in this long enough now to have watched the pair come all the way back around on him, and the only thing that saved him was that he never sold. Now, before any of that turns into an action, you are owed the strongest case against every word I have said, and I am going to give it to you the way I would want it given to me. Let me be straight with you. The bear case on silver here is genuinely good. The research desks at the major dealers lay it out plainly, and it goes like this. If the dollar firms up and inflation stays sticky enough to keep real yields positive, the whole monetary argument for both metals weakens at once, And silver has a second problem gold does not have, which is a factory floor. Industrial fabrication is forecast to fall to a 4-year low. Solar, which has been the great bullish story attached to this metal for years, is going the wrong way right now because manufacturers have gotten very good at using less silver per cell and are substituting other materials where they can. Jewelry demand has fallen 2 years running. What is actually holding the deficit open at this point is investment demand, bars and coins bought by people like you and me running at a 3-year high. That is the softest leg to stand on because a solar plant's order book does not change its mind in a weekend, and a retail buyer absolutely does. And there is a harder point still. The most bullish published range on Wall Street, the outlier from one of the big American banks, is explicitly built on the assumption that this ratio compresses back toward where it went in 2011. That is an assumption sitting underneath a forecast, not a fact underneath a floor. If the ratio does not compress, that entire case does not happen. Meanwhile, the ratio sitting near its long run average means the cheap silver argument is weaker now than it was a year and a half ago, and any honest person has to say so out loud. Here is what I cannot tell you. I cannot tell you whether this ratio widens out toward 80 before it ever narrows again. I cannot tell you whether the next real move comes from a rate cycle or from a panic, and those two produce completely different behavior in this pair. I will not insult you by pretending I know the level or the timing, and anybody who does know is not telling you for free. What I hold to anyway is this, and it is narrow on purpose. The supply structure is a fact and not a forecast. Silver's production does not answer its own price, and no amount of dollar strength changes that. The official sector keeps choosing metal it can hold in its own vault, and in more than 2 centuries of American money, this pair has never once stated any single number, no matter who wrote it down or how sound their reasoning was. So what does a calm owner actually do with that? Own the metal itself rather than a claim on it, because everything we just walked through about paper and physical is the reason that distinction exists. Size the position so that no shakeout, no margin call, no bad quarter can ever put you in a position where you have to sell it. Forced sellers do not get to choose their price. Decide the split between your gold and your silver deliberately as a ratio, the way Dale prices feed, instead of letting it be decided by accident based on which metal you happen to buy first. And never, under any circumstances, let a screen make the decision that the relationship should be making. And write down the ratio you own it the way Dale wrote down a feed spread on the day he said it, not the dollar price you paid, the ratio. Because a year from now, the dollar price will have told you a story that is mostly about the dollar, and the ratio will tell you whether the decision you made was actually a good one. Very few people who own both metals could tell you that number about their own holdings, and it is the one number that would let them judge themselves honestly. That is the real line between a smart hold and a hopeful one. A smart hold has a reason that is not the price. A hopeful hold is waiting for the price to come back and prove it was right all along. The last thing worth saying is about timing, and not the kind you are thinking of. The buyers with the best information in the world, the central banks, made this decision already and are still making it every quarter. The pension committees have not. The financial networks have not. Your neighbors have not. There is a stretch in every one of these cycles where the people who move the most money are quietly doing the thing, while the people who talk the most about money are explaining why it is unnecessary. That stretch is where you are standing. By the time this ratio is what everybody is discussing at the coffee shop and in the barber's chair, the discount that made the conversation worth having will already have been handed to somebody else. So let me leave you with the same thing I would leave with my own family. Get the free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide. It lays out how a retiree moves a portion of a 401k or an IRA into physical gold and physical silver held in your name without taxes and without penalties. And it explains it the way you would want it explained to your own mother. And think about it in terms of what outlasts you, because that is what this actually is. The account statement is a number. A coin is an object that ends up in somebody's hand after you are gone, and it does not need a password or a platform or anybody's permission to still be worth something when your grandchildren are the ones holding it. That is what people mean when they say metal is legacy money. If you are watching this on your TV, Scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to shieldmysavings.com. And if you have $100,000 or more in a retirement account and you watch this whole thing through, mention that when you request the guide, and our team will set you up with a free one-on-one educational web conference, just a conversation about your own situation with someone who does this all day. From our family to yours, no obligation, nothing to buy. Why now, honestly, with no manufactured deadline attached? Because right now, nothing feels urgent about this pair. The ratio is sitting near its average, the panic is not on, the celebration is not on, and that is exactly the moment when a decision like this costs the least and can still be changed. When it stops feeling calm, it will already have moved, and the men in 1792 learned that the hard way, with the whole country's coinage on the line. Dale still keeps the old ticket book from the feed yard in a drawer. He will tell you that the number stamped on those tickets, the dollars per ton, was never the number that decided whether he made a living that year. It was the other one, the relationship between what he sold and what it produced, that told him the truth months before the bank statement did. You own silver. It has two prices. Go look at the second one.